It started with a question no one inside the royal circle ever thought would need an answer. Why would Princess Alexandra, one of the last living links to the Queen Mother, quietly place a velvet-lined box into Catherine's hands with no cameras, no announcement, and absolutely no involvement from Queen Camilla? Not even a warning, just a moment frozen in time. A gesture loaded with history, loyalty, and consequences. And the strangest part? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. No one was supposed to know, which forces us to ask something even more unsettling. What makes a royal tradition break so silently that the world only notices after the damage is already done? Because royal jewels don't move without meaning. They don't get handed over because someone felt sentimental. They don't bypass a queen consort by accident. So what happened? Why now? And why Catherine? Before we go any further, pause for a moment and consider this. If the Queen Mother intended these jewels for Catherine all along, that means someone has been guarding a secret for more than 20 years, and someone else has been living under an assumption that was never true. Which one is more dangerous? The truth that finally surfaces, or the person who believed they were safe? Most royal stories unfold slowly, through carefully staged photographs and official statements. But not this one. This story begins with a private action that rippled outward, quietly at first, until the whispers grew louder than protocol could contain. And those whispers all lead back to a single moment behind closed doors. A room no cameras entered. A decision no aide approved. A handover witnessed by only 2 people, and now the world is asking why. Let's pull back for a second. Have you ever watched something small happen? A gesture, a look, a pause, and instantly felt that it meant more than anyone admitted? That's what this moment was. To the public, it appeared routine, polite, almost unnoticeable. But to the people who understood royal history, bloodlines, and the Queen Mother's ironclad intentions, it felt like a message. A shift. A signal that something inside the monarchy had quietly, but permanently, changed. Because for decades, the Queen Mother's private jewels weren't just locked away. They were protected, reserved, spoken about in hushed tones. Not part of the official royal collection, not displayed for the world. These pieces were personal, selected with intention, and whoever received them would inherit more than diamonds. They would inherit meaning, responsibility, expectation. So here's the real question. Why would Princess Alexandra choose this moment, of all possible moments, to pass them on? Why not years earlier? Why not after the coronation? Why not through the palace's official channels, the way tradition demands? Silence. That's the answer the palace gives. But silence is never empty in the royal family. Silence usually means protection, or fear, or strategy. And the truth is, Catherine didn't reach for those jewels. She didn't ask for them. They were placed into her hands, deliberately, by someone who understands the weight of history better than anyone still alive. Princess Alexandra isn't impulsive. She isn't dramatic. She doesn't act without reason. So if she bypassed Camilla entirely, then something happened long before this moment that set everything in motion. Something no one talked about publicly. Something that changed the Queen Mother's plans and Catherine's future before Catherine ever became a Windsor. Because here's the twist no one expected. This story doesn't begin with Catherine. It doesn't begin with Camilla. It doesn't even begin in the present. It begins decades ago, with a decision the Queen Mother made quietly, privately, and intentionally. A decision that would remain hidden until now. And if what insiders claim is true, then Princess Alexandra didn't choose Catherine. She fulfilled a promise. But the real shock? The person who was never meant to receive anything believed everything was already hers. Which means the handover wasn't just emotional. It was disruptive, destabilizing, and possibly unavoidable. Because if the Queen Mother saw what was coming before anyone else did, and prepared for it, then the question is no longer why Princess Alexandra handed over the jewels. The question becomes, what did the Queen Mother know? And why did she want Catherine, and only Catherine, to be the one to carry it? The moment didn't explode into public view. There were no flashing cameras. No headlines. No gasps echoing through a palace corridor. Instead, it began with something far more dangerous. A secret that refused to stay buried. Because long before Catherine ever stepped into royal life, long before the world began analyzing every gesture and every smile. The Queen Mother made a choice that only a handful of people knew about, and even fewer understood. And Princess Alexandra was one of them. To grasp why this moment matters, you have to understand the role Alexandra played inside the royal family. She wasn't a distant relative who floated in and out of ceremonial events. She was a confidant, a witness, a keeper of things never spoken beyond drawing room walls. So when she moved, even slightly, it wasn't random. It was intentional, calculated. And here's where things get unsettling. Catherine didn't realize what accepting that box would mean. Not fully. Not yet. To her, it may have felt like a gesture of warmth, a quiet moment of family connection. But in the monarchy, nothing is ever just a moment. Every gesture carries history. Every object carries expectation. Every decision carries consequences. Let's step back in time for a second. Picture the Queen Mother in her later years, sharp, observant, still capable of shaping the monarchy without ever raising her voice. She had lived through abdication, war, scandal, and survival. She understood what stability required and who could provide it. And if anyone knew how to protect the future, it was her. Which makes one detail impossible to ignore. She didn't leave everything to her daughter. She didn't leave everything to her granddaughter. She left specific pieces to be passed on only when the time was right. Not before. Not after. Only when. Ask yourself this. What kind of person prepares for a future she will never see? And what did she believe was coming that required such careful planning? Because this wasn't jewelry sitting in a display case gathering dust. These were pieces with history. Jewels worn during negotiations. Jewels worn during moments of triumph. Jewels worn when the monarchy needed to appear unshakable. In other words, these weren't decorations. They were symbols. And symbols don't change hands lightly. Now think about Catherine. For years, she played her role quietly, gracefully, without demanding attention or altering protocol. She didn't push. She didn't posture. She didn't behave like someone waiting for power. And yet, silently, power shifted toward her. Not because she asked, but because others watched and decided. People forget that Catherine didn't marry into a normal family. She married into an institution where perception shapes destiny, where stability is currency, and where history repeats itself whether anyone is ready or not. So when Alexandra placed that box into Catherine's hands, it wasn't the beginning of something new. It was the continuation of a plan already set in motion. But here comes the part that raises the stakes. If the Queen Mother truly intended these jewels to bypass Camilla, then someone inside the family has known the truth all along and chose not to intervene. Why? Was it respect? Was it fear? Or was it strategy? And more importantly, why reveal it now? Let's talk timing. Moments like these don't happen randomly inside the monarchy. There are no coincidences, only decisions disguised as circumstances. Alexandra could have made this handover at any point in the last 20 years. But she didn't. She waited. Through public reshuffling. Through shifting titles. Through health crises and transitions. Through the final passing of the previous monarch. Only after all those changes did she finally move. Which leaves one possibility hanging in the air like a held breath. Something, or someone, made the moment unavoidable. People often assume the monarchy is held together by rules, tradition, and ceremony. But anyone watching closely knows the truth. It's held together by relationships. And relationships shift. All it takes is one change. A strained silence, an unspoken tension, a quiet withdrawal, and suddenly the entire structure adjusts. So imagine what it means when a woman as loyal and traditional as Princess Alexandra bypasses the sitting queen consort. It means the shift already happened. Quietly, irreversibly. And the handover wasn't the cause. It was the effect. But here's the twist most people haven't considered. Catherine didn't just receive jewels. She received responsibility. Responsibility that was never meant to be shared. Responsibility that comes with expectations no one has explained publicly. Not yet. Because if these jewels were meant only for the woman the Queen Mother believed would secure the monarchy's future, then Catherine isn't just a princess. She becomes something else entirely. And that opens the door to a question almost no one wants to ask out loud. Where does this leave Camilla? Not symbolically, not emotionally, practically. Inside a system where symbols matter more than words, what does it mean when the past reaches forward and bypasses the present? Was this a correction, a warning, a fulfillment, or a shift that was always destined to happen, with or without anyone's approval? We're about to go deeper into that answer. But before we do, consider this. Every major turning point in royal history begins long before the world realizes it. The abdication didn't start the day it was announced. Diana's impact didn't begin the day she married. And this moment, this quiet transfer of private jewels, didn't begin in the room where it happened. It began years earlier, with a decision, a prediction, and a promise. The jewels didn't just reappear. They resurfaced. And in the royal family, resurfacing is far more dangerous than being found. Because when something resurfaces, it means someone knew where it was all along and was waiting. So here's the question that ignited everything. Why now? Why would Princess Alexandra choose this moment, after decades of silence, to allow the Queen Mother's most guarded treasures to leave her possession? Not displayed, not catalogued, not even acknowledged publicly, just quietly placed into Catherine's hands, as if history itself had been holding its breath. To understand that, you have to start with who Princess Alexandra really is. Not the version most people think they know, but the version only insiders speak about. Because Alexandra wasn't simply a relative. She was a witness, a bridge between generations, a woman who stood close enough to power to understand it, but far enough to see the truth without needing to control it. And unlike many in the royal circle, she never chased influence. She protected it. Let's rewind for a moment. Picture the monarchy in the late 1990s, a family fractured by loss, adjusting to public scrutiny like never before. While others struggled to navigate the shifting ground beneath them, the Queen Mother remained unshaken. And right beside her, quietly observing, was Princess Alexandra. She learned by watching, not reacting, not interrupting, watching. Have you ever met someone who didn't need to speak to be understood? Someone whose presence carried weight without force? That was Alexandra. She didn't make demands. She didn't insert herself. She absorbed. And the Queen Mother trusted her because of that. Trust inside the royal family isn't given easily. It's earned through loyalty, silence, and the ability to keep what matters hidden, even when the world is demanding answers. Which leads to the first shocking truth. The jewels didn't disappear after the Queen Mother's death. They were intentionally withdrawn, removed from circulation, locked away, not out of grief, but out of purpose. People assumed they went into the royal vault like everything else. They didn't. They went somewhere far more guarded. Into memory, into instruction, into the hands of someone who knew exactly when to act. Princess Alexandra wasn't chosen because she was family. She was chosen because she was steady, unshakable, a person who would never use the jewels as leverage, threat, or legacy. And that matters, because the Queen Mother wasn't sentimental about royal artifacts. She didn't treat jewels like decorations. She treated them like tools. Symbols of continuity that could be placed strategically when the moment demanded strength. So ask yourself, if the Queen Mother knew the future would test the monarchy, who would she trust to protect the pieces that mattered most? Someone loud, someone ambitious, or someone invisible enough to be undeniable? Here's the irony. Most people today barely talk about Princess Alexandra. She isn't splashed across headlines. She doesn't trend. She doesn't chase relevance. But that's exactly why she mattered. The royal family has always relied on people like her, the quiet ones who carry the institution forward while the world focuses on louder figures. And when the Queen Mother needed someone to carry out a private instruction, one that couldn't be delayed, rewritten, or overridden, she didn't choose the obvious heir. She chose the observer. Let's go deeper. There's a reason Alexandra's role in the family is unlike anyone else's. She lived through the era when duty wasn't optional, when personal feelings came second, and when loyalty was measured in silence rather than public gestures. She saw the monarchy at its strongest and at its most fragile. She knew how easily perception could either stabilize or destroy. So when she was given something to protect, she didn't guard it like treasure. She guarded it like truth. Now imagine holding on to that truth for decades. Through scandals, through upheaval, through shifting public opinion, through the rise and fall of royal popularity. Most people would have broken. Most people would have questioned. But Alexandra waited. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she knew too well what would happen if she acted at the wrong time. And here's where the story sharpens. This wasn't her decision. It was her assignment. A long-term instruction given by a woman who understood that the future wouldn't belong to the loudest voice, but to the person capable of carrying the crown without needing to wear it. Enter Catherine. When Catherine married into the royal family, most people saw a love story, a fairy tale, a future queen consort chosen by fate or romance. But behind the scenes, something far more strategic was happening. Catherine represented something the monarchy hadn't had in a long time. Stability without force, grace without performance, strength without rebellion. She didn't arrive demanding space. She created it by presence. And while the world focused on her fashion, her smile, her composure, the people who understood legacy noticed something else, something the Queen Mother had predicted long before. Catherine could anchor the monarchy in a way no one else could. Not by replacing anyone, not by competing, but by enduring. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the person who never tries to take control, and therefore becomes the only one trusted with it. And that is exactly why Princess Alexandra waited. She didn't act the moment Catherine joined the family. She observed her. Not for days, not for months, for years, until one thing became impossible to deny. Catherine wasn't just the future. She was the foundation. But there was still one problem. A silent one, a complicated one, a person who believed that the jewels and everything they symbolized would eventually belong to her. A belief no one corrected, a belief that was never challenged, a belief that made the handover explosive before anyone even knew it happened. Because the moment the box left Alexandra's hands, the past collided with the present, and the person who thought she was next in line was suddenly, silently, bypassed. The shock wasn't loud. It didn't erupt. It settled, slowly, like the moment before a storm when everything goes still and you realize the silence is the warning. Because the royal family doesn't react with outbursts. They react with stillness. And when stillness appears where certainty once lived, it means one thing. Someone's position just shifted. Let's talk about assumptions, because they are the most dangerous currency inside the monarchy. Camilla spent years believing that certain heirlooms, certain privileges, certain symbols would fall naturally into her possession. Not because she demanded them, not because she claimed them, but because tradition suggested they would be hers. No one corrected her. No one clarified. No one hinted that the Queen Mother had set a different plan in motion long before Camilla's role solidified, and that silence allowed a belief to grow into expectation. So when Princess Alexandra acted, she wasn't just fulfilling a promise. She was breaking an assumption. And nothing inside the royal family causes more shock than realizing the past was never what you believed. But here's where the story deepens. People assume the Queen Mother didn't plan beyond her lifetime. They assume she left keepsakes, sentimental items, or instructions that held emotional meaning but no structural weight. They assume she focused on tradition rather than foresight. Those assumptions are wrong. The Queen Mother didn't just live through history. She shaped it. She understood that the monarchy isn't preserved by ceremony. It's preserved by placement. Who stands where? Who carries what? Who receives which symbol at which moment? So when she separated certain jewels from the official royal collection, she wasn't thinking about beauty. She was thinking about succession. Not the legal kind, the symbolic kind. Because the monarchy operates on two levels. The system the world sees, and the system that actually matters. On paper, crowns and titles determine hierarchy. In reality, symbols determine power. Which means the transfer of a single piece of jewelry can speak louder than a royal decree. And here's the part almost no one outside palatial walls understands. The Queen Mother wasn't sentimental about jewels. She was strategic. She wore specific pieces during moments when the monarchy needed strength. She withheld others when she wanted to send a message without speaking. Every stone had purpose. Every brooch had timing. Every gift had implication. So if she intentionally removed a portion of her private collection and placed them into the hands of someone she trusted to wait, then the meaning is not accidental. It is deliberate. Which brings us back to Princess Alexandra. Why was she the keeper? Because she was the only one who could protect the plan without being influenced by ambition, pressure, or shifting dynamics. Alexandra's life was defined by duty without spotlight. She wasn't fighting for relevance. She wasn't positioning herself publicly. She wasn't involved in the political undercurrents that shaped the later years of the monarchy. She was steady, constant, predictable in the way that makes someone trustworthy. And the Queen Mother valued that more than anything. So Alexandra waited. She watched the monarchy reshape itself. She saw new roles emerge. She saw loyalties tested. She saw the public shift from reverence to judgment and back again. But she did nothing. Not because she forgot. Not because she hesitated. But because the moment wasn't right. Timing is everything in the royal family. Move too early, you disrupt stability. Move too late, you lose control. Move at the precise moment, and history turns without resistance. So what changed? What forced Alexandra's hand? To answer that, look at Catherine not as a public figure, but as a presence. She didn't demand space. Space formed around her. She didn't insist on authority. Authority found her. There is a difference between someone who reaches for influence and someone who becomes unavoidable. Catherine became unavoidable. Not because of scandal, not because of pressure, but because the monarchy needed something only she provided. Continuity without chaos. Quiet resilience. Unshakable composure. The Queen Mother predicted the future would require a figure who could soften turbulence without collapsing under it. Someone who did not need to win the public, but would naturally hold them. Someone whose strength wasn't visible until it was tested. Catherine was that person. But here's the twist. The Queen Mother made this judgment before Catherine ever entered the royal family, which raises an even bigger question. How could she possibly have known? Was it intuition? Was it observation? Or was it experience? The kind gained from watching 3 generations rise and fall around a crown no one can ever fully control. Whatever the answer, Princess Alexandra wasn't choosing Catherine. She was confirming her, which is why the handover felt less like a gift and more like a shift. A repositioning, a silent endorsement from a woman no longer alive, carried out by the one person who still remembered exactly what she intended. Now imagine standing in Catherine's position. You've spent years earning trust without asking for it. Years supporting rather than replacing. Years stepping forward only when needed, never for attention. And suddenly, someone places a box in your hands that tells you, without words, that the future has already been decided, and you are now part of something larger than yourself. How do you react? Do you feel honored? Overwhelmed? Confused? Or do you sense, even before understanding, that nothing in your life will ever be the same? Because this wasn't a ceremonial moment. It wasn't framed in tradition. It wasn't announced. It was private, which makes it far more powerful. Ceremony tells the world what the monarchy wants them to see. Silence tells the truth. And the truth is this. The Queen Mother didn't choose Catherine because of her title. She chose her because of her character. And character cannot be inherited. It can only be revealed. But there is still one detail we haven't touched. The detail that transforms this from a historical footnote into a seismic shift. The handover didn't happen because the jewels were ready. It happened because someone else wasn't. Someone who believed she was next. Someone who thought the Queen Mother's legacy would naturally fall into her hands. Someone who never imagined being bypassed. Not quietly, not deliberately, not permanently. And the moment that realization takes hold, everything that has been stable becomes uncertain. Because symbols don't just reflect power, they redirect it. And once redirected, nothing returns to the way it was. The Queen Mother's will wasn't the final word. Not even close. Most people assume that when a royal passes, everything is settled through documents, signatures, and legal language. But that's only true for ordinary legacies, not personal ones. Because in the royal family, the most important instructions are almost never written down. They're spoken, whispered, passed from one trusted soul to another. And when the Queen Mother realized her time was approaching, she didn't rely solely on paper. She relied on people, which is what makes this next part so staggering. There was a written will, yes, but there was also something else. A private directive, a separate instruction that did not appear in any official archive. Something only a handful of individuals knew existed, and even fewer understood. And Princess Alexandra was one of them. But here's the twist. That private instruction wasn't meant to be carried out immediately after the Queen Mother's death. It was meant to wait. Not for months. Not for years. For the right person. For the right moment. For the right purpose. So what was in that instruction? Not a list, not a confession, just a single, deceptively simple message. Hold until needed. Hold. Not give. Not distribute. Hold. But needed by who? Needed for what? And needed when? Those were the questions no one asked aloud. Because in the royal family, curiosity can be dangerous and certainty can be blinding. Let's step into the days following the Queen Mother's passing. The world mourned. Tributes flooded in. Ceremonies unfolded with predictable precision. Public grief was structured, sanitized, even the way the monarchy prefers its emotions delivered. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Quiet meetings, closed doors, selective conversations. Because while the public was focused on remembrance, the palace was focused on preservation. Not of jewels, not of artifacts, of stability. And stability depends on control, which is why the Queen Mother was meticulous about what she left and what she withheld. Ask yourself this. Why would a woman known for tradition remove certain jewels from the predictable path of inheritance? Why break a pattern that had been followed for generations? Unless she believed the pattern itself would eventually break. Unless she knew the future would not resemble the past. Unless she understood that one day, the monarchy would need a different kind of strength, and that strength would not come from hierarchy, but from character. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable truth in this story. The Queen Mother did not plan for Camilla, not out of cruelty, not out of judgment, but because Camilla was never part of the future she envisioned. Her plans were formed long before Camilla's role became legitimate, long before public acceptance shifted, long before history was rewritten through patience and endurance. So when the Queen Mother made her private arrangements, she wasn't excluding Camilla. She simply wasn't including her. There's a difference. In the royal family, not being chosen is rarely spoken. It's implied. It's understood without acknowledgement. But in this case, silence did something no one anticipated. It allowed assumptions to grow. People inside the palace believed that once Charles eventually took the throne, Camilla would automatically inherit the Queen Mother's symbolic legacy. Not legally, but emotionally. And the thing about assumptions? They are invisible until they collapse. Now let's return to the phrase hidden in that private instruction. Hold until needed. What does needed mean in a monarchy? It doesn't mean sentiment. It means threat, crisis, transition. Moments when perception matters more than protocol. Moments when a single gesture can stabilize an entire institution. And here's the uncomfortable realization. The Queen Mother didn't believe stability would come from the crown alone. She believed it would come from the woman standing beside it. A woman the world trusted. A woman the family trusted. A woman who would not repeat history, but correct it. And at the time she wrote that instruction, that woman did not yet exist inside the royal family. So she waited, through someone else. Princess Alexandra became the bridge between intention and reality. Her role was not to decide. Her role was to delay, to observe, to wait until the unspoken answer became obvious. And when it did, she was to act, without hesitation, without announcement, and without explaining why. But here's where things grow even more complicated. There was another layer to the Queen Mother's plan, a layer no one expected. Somewhere among her private belongings was a letter, sealed, handwritten, and addressed not to the crown, but to the person who would one day receive the jewels. Not instructions, not justification, a message. And according to palace whispers, the letter contained a single line that would change everything Catherine believed about her role. But no one knows when Catherine will open it, or if she already has. Because the royal family never reveals emotional moments in real time. They wait. They process. They let the world speculate while they adjust from within. But if that letter says what many insiders suspect, then the handover wasn't an act of kindness. It was an activation, a shift from supporting figure to chosen figure. And if that is true, then this story is not about jewelry at all. It's about succession in its most quiet and powerful form. Which raises the next question. The one the monarchy is not prepared to answer publicly. If Catherine was chosen long before anyone realized it, then what happens to the person who believed she was next in line? Because symbols don't just sit. They speak. They crown. They erase. They redefine. And that is why the Queen Mother's private instruction wasn't written into her will. Wills can be challenged. Private promises cannot. There's something almost eerie about the way the Queen Mother planned for a future she would never witness. Most people prepare wills to conclude their story. She prepared hers to begin one. And that realization forces us to rethink everything we thought we understood about her final years. Because her decisions weren't reactive. They were predictive. Almost as if she knew the monarchy would face a moment when its stability depended not on the crown, but on the person capable of calming the storm around it. So let's go back. Years before Catherine appeared, years before Camilla was accepted, years before the public softened. The Queen Mother watched history repeat itself more than once. She saw what happened when the monarchy relied on popularity instead of endurance. She saw what happened when emotion overpowered duty. She saw what happened when the wrong person carried the wrong symbol at the wrong moment. So she adjusted the future quietly, without telling the future it was being rewritten. That is the kind of strategy only someone who has survived crisis after crisis can understand. Now pause for a moment and consider this. If the Queen Mother believed the monarchy would eventually need Catherine, before Catherine existed in the royal sphere, then her plan wasn't emotional. It was preventative. She wasn't choosing a favorite. She was choosing protection, because sometimes the safest person to carry power is the one who never asks for it. And Catherine has never asked. Not once. Even now. But there's another side to this that makes the entire situation much more delicate. Silence doesn't just protect. It also creates shadow. And in that shadow grew a second narrative, the one unfolding around Camilla. Imagine living with an expectation that feels so natural, so unchallenged, that you begin to rely on it without ever confirming it. Camilla did not demand the Queen Mother's legacy. She assumed it would come. Everyone assumed it would come. After all, she became the queen consort. She stood beside the king. She earned acceptance through patience, endurance, and years of weathering public hostility. So why wouldn't she inherit the symbolic pieces tied to the matriarch of the modern monarchy? No one questioned it. Not the public. Not commentators. Not even those inside palace walls. And that's what made Alexandra's silence so dangerous. Because silence doesn't just hide truth. It allows false certainty to grow. So when the moment finally came, and Catherine received what Camilla never expected to lose, a line was crossed without a word spoken. A line no one can uncross. But here's the part that makes everything even more fragile. Catherine didn't ask for this. She didn't orchestrate it. She didn't position herself to replace anyone. She simply stood still while the future shifted around her. And that is what changes the emotional temperature inside the palace. Not jealousy, not anger, but something far more destabilizing. Uncertainty. Because if the Queen Mother's plans are only now being revealed, what else did she set in motion that hasn't surfaced yet? Did she leave more than one instruction? More than one message? More than one symbolic transfer waiting for Alexandra, or someone else, to activate? These questions are not theoretical. They are real, and they are becoming harder for the palace to suppress, because symbols rarely move alone. And when one piece of history resurfaces, others tend to follow. Let's return to that sealed letter for a moment, the one rumored to contain a single line that changes everything. If that line is what insiders believe it is, then Catherine wasn't chosen because she married a future king. She was chosen because she embodies something the Queen Mother considered irreplaceable. Stability that does not fracture under pressure. But here's the twist most people haven't processed yet. A choice made in the past can reshape the hierarchy of the present. Without ceremony, without proclamation, without announcement. And that is why this story is more than royal intrigue. It's a recalibration, a quiet redirection of power, away from expectation and toward preparation. Now imagine being in the room when Catherine received that box. The air would shift, not because of what was inside, but because of what it implied. It wasn't just a moment. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the Queen Mother saw farther than anyone realized. Confirmation that Alexandra had waited for a reason. Confirmation that Catherine was no longer simply part of the monarchy. She was now tied to its foundation. But here's the final question this chapter leaves behind. One the palace cannot answer without unraveling their own stability. If the Queen Mother made plans for Catherine long before anyone else did, then what else was set in motion that the world hasn't seen yet? Because if one hidden instruction has now surfaced, it means others may still be waiting. And when they emerge, the monarchy may find itself facing a truth even more shocking than the jewels themselves. The jewels weren't meant to be worn. They were meant to speak. And the message they carried was louder than any crown, title, or public announcement the palace could have ever issued. Because in the royal family, jewels are never just jewels. They are history disguised as decoration, power disguised as beauty, instruction disguised as inheritance. So when those pieces resurfaced, not in a display case, not on a velvet cushion during a state occasion, but in Catherine's hands, something extraordinary happened. A silent message was delivered without a single word spoken. But here's the part that makes this moment so unsettling. That message wasn't meant for Catherine. It was meant for Camilla. Let's pause on that for a moment, because it changes everything. Imagine standing in a world where symbols determine reality, where the object someone receives matters more than what they say, where the absence of something carries more weight than its presence. Now imagine realizing that the one symbol you believed would eventually confirm your position has already passed you by, quietly, deliberately, permanently, and you didn't even know it happened. That is the kind of silent earthquake the monarchy specializes in. No shouting, no confrontation, just a shift, so controlled, so strategic, that by the time anyone notices, the old balance is already gone. Let's take a closer look at these particular jewels. They weren't the pieces the public recognizes from portraits and documentaries. They weren't the tiaras loaned for weddings or the brooches seen at state funerals. These were the Queen Mother's private pieces, personal selections, jewels she wore during moments when appearance mattered less than intention. There are stories, quiet ones, about how she chose her jewelry the way a general chooses strategy. Certain diamonds for meetings where strength was required. Certain pearls for moments when softness could disarm a threat. Certain brooches when she needed to remind the world, gently, elegantly, that the monarchy may bend, but it does not break. So if these pieces were withheld from public circulation, it wasn't because they were fragile. It was because they were powerful, too powerful to fall into the wrong hands. Which leads us to the next crucial detail. These jewels did not symbolize rank. They symbolized readiness. They weren't given to the woman who held the highest title. They were given to the woman prepared to carry the highest responsibility. And that is where everything shifts. Because in traditional royal logic, jewelry moves upward toward the queen consort. But in this case, it moved forward toward the future queen, not the present one. That is not an accident. That is a message that bypasses hierarchy to land exactly where intention demands. Now think about what that means emotionally. Not politically, emotionally. The Queen Mother wasn't choosing Catherine over Camilla as a person. She was choosing the monarchy over uncertainty. And she believed Catherine would one day become the stabilizing force the institution could lean on. Not because of her personality, not because of her popularity, but because of something much rarer. She does not fracture, even under pressure, even under scrutiny, even under expectation. The Queen Mother lived long enough to know the difference between someone who can hold power and someone who can survive it. And Catherine, without knowing it, had passed a test she never knew she was taking. But here's the part almost no one has considered. The handover was not designed to elevate Catherine. It was designed to inform Camilla. Inform her of what? That the past still speaks. That the Queen Mother's influence did not end with her lifetime. That someone else was always meant to carry the legacy she valued most. And that someone was not Camilla. Now imagine the weight of that realization. Not as a headline, not as public humiliation, but as a private truth. A truth delivered without confrontation, without explanation, without room to negotiate. Because symbols do not ask permission. They simply shift reality. There's an old saying inside the palace, one rarely spoken outside of it. The crown is inherited, but the right to carry it is earned. Camilla inherited proximity to the crown. Catherine earned proximity to legacy. There is a difference, and that difference is now becoming visible in ways no one expected. But here's the twist that makes this moment even more extraordinary. The jewels weren't meant to stay hidden forever. They were meant to reappear at a moment when their meaning would be unmistakable. Which means the timing wasn't about Alexandra. It wasn't about Catherine. It wasn't even about Camilla. It was about the monarchy reaching a point where silence could no longer protect the truth. So the jewels surfaced, not as ornaments, as proof. Proof that the Queen Mother saw beyond her lifetime. Proof that she trusted Catherine long before Catherine existed in her world. Proof that the future had already been decided, without needing to be declared. If you've ever watched the royal family carefully, you know one truth. What is not said is always louder than what is spoken. And this moment, this silent transfer of private jewels, spoke louder than any speech the palace could have written. Because the Queen Mother didn't need to leave behind a public declaration. She left behind a symbol that could not be misunderstood. But here's where things become even more fascinating. The jewels were never meant to be displayed immediately. They were meant to wait. Not for a coronation. Not for a milestone. For a moment of clarity. A moment when the difference between title and trust became impossible to ignore. And that moment has now arrived. Let's step into the emotional core of this story. Imagine being Catherine. You are handed something you didn't ask for. Not recognition. Not elevation. Responsibility. And not responsibility in the abstract sense, but responsibility tied to someone who shaped the modern monarchy with her bare will. The Queen Mother wasn't gentle. She was steel-wrapped in lace. She endured every storm with grace, not softness. And now, that legacy, that resilience, is handed to Catherine quietly, almost as if to say, you are the one who can carry what comes next. Not publicly, not ceremonially, privately, which is the deepest form of trust inside the royal family. But while Catherine received that confirmation, another truth began to take shape on the other side of the equation. Camilla now has to confront a reality she never anticipated. Not humiliation, not rejection, something far more destabilizing. Irrelevance to the Queen Mother's future plan. Not to the crown, not to the institution today, but to the legacy that reaches forward, the one that determines who holds symbolic power when history shifts. And history always shifts. But here's the part that almost no one is acknowledging publicly. This moment was not a correction. It was a continuation. A continuation of a decision the Queen Mother made before the world changed around her. A decision based not on who would sit beside the king, but on who would hold the monarchy together when the crown itself was not enough. Most people think of royal power as something linear. One generation passes it to the next. One queen replaces another. One consort follows the previous. But the Queen Mother understood something different. Power inside the monarchy is not about position. It is about perception. The person who embodies stability becomes stability. The person the public trusts becomes the foundation. Not because of title, but because of presence. And Catherine's presence has done something rare. She has unified without speaking. She has reassured without forcing. She has survived without reacting. And to the Queen Mother, a woman who lived through abdication, war, scandal, public rage, and private heartbreak, that quality mattered more than anything else. Which brings us back to the jewels. They were not meant to shine. They were meant to signal. Signal that the future has already been anchored. Signal that the monarchy is preparing quietly, strategically. Signal that the person the Queen Mother chose is now the one holding the legacy she valued most. And Camilla? Her reality shifts not because Catherine rises, but because the past has spoken in a language she cannot change. A language written not in words, but in inheritance. But now comes the question that the palace is not ready to face. If this is only the first symbol to resurface, what comes next? Will there be more? Another transfer? Another message? Another moment that reveals what has been hidden? Because history rarely moves alone. It arrives in patterns. One event opens the door for the next. And when symbols begin to surface, it means one thing. The future is no longer waiting. It is already unfolding. For years, Camilla believed the jewels were hers. Not because she demanded them, not because she claimed them, but because tradition suggested she would receive them. Naturally, eventually, inevitably. And no one corrected her. That's where the real shock begins. Because the monarchy doesn't always lie with words. Sometimes it lies with silence. Imagine living inside a system where no one ever tells you yes, but no one ever tells you no. You fill in the space with certainty. You build expectations out of echoes. You mistake quiet for agreement. That was Camilla's reality. Not arrogance. Not entitlement. Assumption. Assumption built over decades. Reinforced by position, proximity, and the belief that history would eventually make room for her. But here's the twist. Everyone inside the family thought the same thing. Advisors, staff, even distant relatives. They all believed the Queen Mother's legacy would naturally pass down through the current Queen Consort. Why wouldn't it? That's how it had always worked. Royal patterns don't break. They repeat. Until suddenly, they don't. Let's rewind to the early years. Long before crowns, long before public acceptance, long before the monarchy softened around Camilla, she spent decades outside the royal structure, then decades trying to enter it, then decades surviving the fallout of being inside it. That journey created a strange kind of confidence. The belief that endurance earns reward, that surviving the impossible eventually leads to recognition. And to be fair, that logic made sense. Camilla waited longer than anyone. She stood through scandal, criticism, and the kind of public hostility that would have destroyed someone weaker. So when the tide finally turned, when the crown rested beside her instead of against her, it felt like the natural conclusion to a painful beginning. In her world, the hardest road finally led to the highest room. So the idea that a quiet decision made decades earlier could override everything she endured, that wasn't just unexpected, it was unthinkable. But this is where the story sharpens. The Queen Mother didn't operate from sentiment. She operated from memory. And memory inside the monarchy is a weapon disguised as wisdom. She had seen what happens when the crown rests on the wrong shoulders. Not morally, not emotionally, but symbolically. She knew history doesn't forgive instability. It magnifies it. So she planned accordingly. Not for the present she lived in, but for the future she feared. Which means Camilla wasn't excluded. She simply wasn't calculated into the equation. Not out of malice, but out of timing. When the Queen Mother made her decisions, Camilla wasn't part of the royal blueprint. She was outside the frame. A variable, not a certainty. And the monarchy never plans around uncertainty. It plans around predictability. Enter Catherine. But not yet. Not in this chapter. Because before Catherine stepped into the story, something else happened. A shift none of the royals saw coming. One person stepped in. One voice finally broke the silence. And it wasn't Alexandra. It wasn't the late Queen. It wasn't Charles. It was someone no one expected, someone whose intervention changed the direction of everything that followed. Their words didn't attack. They didn't accuse. They simply exposed one truth. The Queen Mother never promised the jewels to Camilla. Not verbally. Not privately. Not symbolically. There had never been a guarantee, only an assumption. And assumptions are the most dangerous things to lose. Because when they collapse, they don't fall quietly. They take everything with them. The revelation didn't explode. It landed, quietly, like a single stone dropped into still water, one you don't notice at first, until the ripples begin to touch everything. Because the royal family doesn't react to shocks the way ordinary families do. There are no raised voices, no trembling confrontations, no sudden demands for explanation. Instead, the palace reacts with something far more chilling. Rearrangement. Not of objects, of dynamics. One day, everything looks the same. The next, the atmosphere feels different, and no one says why. That's what happened after the truth surfaced. Camilla didn't lose anything publicly. Nothing was taken from her. Nothing was denied to her. But something inside the palace shifted, imperceptible to the world, unmistakable to those who live within its walls. Suddenly, people spoke more carefully. Suddenly, certain topics went unmentioned. Suddenly, the air around Camilla changed. Not out of disrespect, but out of awareness. Awareness that something she believed would one day be hers, never actually was. Now here's where the story becomes almost painfully human. Camilla had built her identity inside the royal family on 3 pillars. Survival, endurance, patience. She waited longer than most people could have survived. She endured more criticism than any royal in modern history. She stayed silent until silence became her strength. So the idea that all of that effort, all of that struggle, did not automatically translate into symbolic inheritance. It wasn't cruel. It was devastating. Because in the monarchy, symbolism matters more than sentiment. Titles can be given. Duties can be reassigned. But symbols? Symbols crown the future. And the Queen Mother chose hers long before Camilla ever had a chance to be considered. Not deliberately. Not spitefully. Simply chronologically. And that is the part most people overlook. History didn't move against Camilla. It moved before her. Now let's return to the moment someone finally spoke up. The moment that cracked the illusion. It didn't happen in a grand setting. Not during a state dinner. not in a formal meeting, not at a public event. It happened in a private conversation. One that lasted only minutes, but changed years of unspoken belief. The person didn't accuse Alexandra. They didn't betray the Queen Mother's secrecy. They simply stated a fact that had never been acknowledged. The jewels were never designated for transfer to the Queen Consort. A single sentence. No explanation. No elaboration. But it was enough. Because truth doesn't need volume when it exposes a foundation. And suddenly, Camilla was no longer dealing with a misunderstanding. She was dealing with reality. A reality that had existed long before she entered the frame. A reality that could not be undone, no matter how gracefully she carried her current role. But here's where things become even more emotionally complex. Camilla didn't react publicly. She didn't withdraw. She didn't challenge anyone. She did what she has always done. She adjusted. And that is what makes her position both admirable and tragic. Because adjustment inside the monarchy is not acceptance. It is survival. The palace is built on unspoken rules, and the most important one is this. You don't respond to the shift. You become smaller, so the shift has space to land. And Camilla did exactly that. But while she was shrinking into silence, something else was expanding around Catherine, something no one could stop. Symbolic inevitability. Not favoritism. Not rivalry. Inevitability. The kind that doesn't need confirmation because it has already been decided by someone who is no longer alive to explain it. And that's why this moment has become so destabilizing for the royal family. Because the Queen Mother is shaping the future from the past, without the palace being able to control it. Let's take a breath here and look at the emotional stakes. Camilla is not the villain in this story. She is the unintended consequence. The Queen Mother did not plan against her. She planned before her. And sometimes, being excluded by history is more painful than being excluded by decision. Because you can't argue with a timeline. You can only accept that you weren't present when fate was decided. But here's the part that sets up everything that follows. The person who finally said no, the one who made it clear that the jewels were not meant for Camilla, didn't stop there. They revealed something else. Something no one expected. Something that shifts the narrative from misunderstanding to revelation. Because the Queen Mother didn't just withhold the jewels. She left conditions. Conditions that could only be fulfilled by one person. And that person was not Camilla. It was someone else entirely. Someone still alive. Someone who had been waiting, just like Alexandra, for the moment the past would resurface. Their identity will change the direction of everything. There was a private promise made long before Catherine ever joined the royal family. Not a written agreement. Not a formal declaration. A spoken vow, quiet, deliberate, unforgettable. And only 3 people knew it existed. 2 of them are gone. 1 of them is still alive. That single truth changes everything. Because if the Queen Mother's intentions were preserved not through documents, but through memory, then the past isn't just resurfacing, it's being fulfilled. Let's go back. Not to Catherine, not to Camilla, but to the moment that started it all. A moment hidden in the late years of the Queen Mother's life. Picture this. The world saw a smiling matriarch, soft, warm, adored. But behind closed doors, she was still the strategist who had survived abdication, steered a monarchy through war, and outlived every threat that tried to weaken the crown. She knew legacy doesn't protect itself. People protect it. And she chose her protector carefully. That's when the promise was made. Not to Charles. Not to the late Queen. Not to any direct heir. But to someone standing just outside the center. Someone trusted enough to carry the truth without bending it. Someone who had no ambition to misuse it. Someone who would never speak unless the moment required it. Princess Alexandra was only part of the plan. There was someone else. Someone the Queen Mother believed would outlive the turbulence she foresaw. And survive long enough to deliver the final piece of what she intended. And that person has been silent for decades. Waiting. Watching. Holding a promise the world didn't know existed. But here's where the story takes a turn no one saw coming. The promise wasn't about the jewels. The jewels were just the proof. The promise was about the person who would one day receive them. And that person was never meant to be chosen by chance. The Queen Mother didn't believe in chance. She believed in patterns. She believed in character. She believed in preparing for storms before skies ever darkened. So she made a private vow that the legacy she valued most would go to the woman capable of carrying the monarchy through its next era, without breaking under it. Not the loudest woman, not the most powerful woman, the strongest one. Strength, to the Queen Mother, wasn't volume. It was endurance without bitterness, grace without performance, loyalty without need for reward. She had seen what happens when charm replaces stability. She had seen what happens when popularity outruns responsibility. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Which brings us to the heart of this chapter. The private promise wasn't based on identity. It was based on readiness. And that meant the Queen Mother didn't select a specific person. She selected a type of person. Someone who would one day exist. Someone who hadn't appeared yet. Someone who would reveal herself not through ambition, but through consistency. Years later, Catherine stepped into that definition without knowing it existed. She didn't audition for the role. She didn't compete for it. She simply became the woman the Queen Mother predicted the monarchy would need. But here's the twist that deepens the stakes. The promise was witnessed, not by advisors, not by distant relatives, by someone whose presence at that moment meant the Queen Mother wanted the vow preserved, not as memory, but as confirmation. And that witness has remained silent all this time. Not out of secrecy, out of timing, because the Queen Mother didn't just ask for the promise to be kept. She specified when it was to be revealed, not during transition, not during crisis, but at the moment when the monarchy would need clarity more than tradition. And according to those who understand the internal rhythm of the palace, that moment has now arrived. The existence of a witness changes the entire narrative. Because a private promise can be dismissed as sentiment. A remembered instruction can be questioned, but a witnessed vow? That becomes undeniable. So who was this person? Not a junior aide, not a casual visitor, not someone who happened to be in the room. This was someone the Queen Mother trusted with her last intentions. Someone who understood that power isn't loud, and truth isn't always written. Someone who knew that the greatest influence inside the monarchy is carried, not displayed. And here's what makes their silence so extraordinary. They kept the promise even when the world shifted, even when the family evolved, even when the future changed shape. They didn't waver. They didn't reinterpret. They didn't interfere. They waited. Because the Queen Mother didn't ask for the promise to be protected. She asked for it to be fulfilled. And fulfillment requires patience. Now think about this. How many people could keep a secret for decades, not out of fear, but out of loyalty? How many could resist the urge to clarify, correct, or comfort when misunderstanding grew around them? Very few. Which means this witness is not only alive, they are exceptional. Someone who understands that timing is more powerful than truth. Someone who knows that revealing something too early can destroy the very legacy it was meant to protect. Let's step into their perspective for a moment. Imagine holding a promise that only activates when the world becomes uncertain. Imagine watching events unfold, scandals, departures, fractures, and resisting the instinct to intervene. Imagine knowing that at some future moment, the monarchy would need something that no one else realized was missing. That requires restraint. That requires clarity. That requires belief. And that belief wasn't in Catherine. It wasn't in the family. It was in the Queen Mother. Her foresight, her judgment, her ability to see stability not in titles, but in temperament. Which brings us to the emotional core of this chapter. The Queen Mother didn't create a contingency plan. She created a safeguard. Not against scandal, not against public opinion, against fragility. She had seen fragility before. She had lived through the consequences. She knew that the crown survives only when the person beside it does not collapse under the weight of expectation. So the private promise wasn't about jewels. It was about endurance. And endurance is not inherited. It is revealed. Years later, Catherine proved, quietly, repeatedly, that she could carry weight without showing strain, that she could stand still without needing to be seen, that she could survive pressure without speaking about survival. And that is what fulfilled the Queen Mother's criteria. Not perfection, not popularity, consistency. But here's where the story tightens. The witness did not reveal the promise when Catherine married into the family. They did not reveal it when the late queen passed. They did not reveal it when the crown transitioned. They waited until something shifted inside the monarchy, something subtle but significant. According to palace insiders, the decision to activate the promise wasn't triggered by a single event. It was triggered by an accumulation, a series of signs that the moment the Queen Mother predicted had finally arrived. Signs that the monarchy needed reinforcement, not ceremony. Signs that the future needed stability, not symbolism. Signs that Catherine was no longer becoming the foundation. She already was. And that's when the witness spoke. Not to the public, not to the press, to one person, Princess Alexandra. And what they shared didn't just confirm the past. It unlocked the present. It made clear that the time for waiting was over. That the Queen Mother's plan had reached its moment of activation. That the private jewels were no longer objects of preservation, but tools of transition. But here's the most stunning detail. The witness didn't just confirm the promise. They revealed one more piece of information, something Alexandra had not known, something the Queen Mother had kept separate, even from her. A final instruction, not about what to do, about who to watch. Because the Queen Mother didn't just predict Catherine, she predicted resistance. She knew someone, at some point, would try to redirect the future, not out of malice, out of fear. And she wanted the witness to ensure that the legacy would not be altered, no matter who tried to influence it. Which leads us to the part of the story no one has spoken publicly. The Queen Mother didn't just choose Catherine. She protected her. Years before Catherine ever needed protecting. Years before she ever stepped into the role now forming around her. And the person who witnessed the promise has been waiting, not just to confirm it, but to defend it. And now that the promise has finally been fulfilled, their identity is no longer just a detail. It is the key to everything that happens next. Because the moment they step forward, even privately, the monarchy will be forced to confront a truth it cannot undo. The Queen Mother's plans were never lost. They were delayed. By design. The Queen Mother predicted a crisis. Not a scandal. Not a disagreement. A collapse. One that wouldn't arrive with headlines or public outrage, but with something far more dangerous. Silence. Because the monarchy is never threatened when the world is loud. It's threatened when the world stops caring. And the Queen Mother saw that future long before anyone else did. She understood that the crown survives wars, divorces, tragedy, and humiliation, but it does not survive irrelevance. So she prepared for the moment when the institution would no longer be protected by awe, but held together by trust. And she knew trust could not be inherited. It had to be earned, which meant the monarchy would one day require a figure who wasn't just accepted, but believed. Someone who could exist beyond ceremony. Someone who would steady the crown by simply standing beneath it. Someone who would not crumble when history shifted. That was the crisis she prepared for. Not chaos. Fragility. Let's go back to the final decade of her life. When the Queen Mother watched the world begin to change around the monarchy in ways no tradition could stop, the public was no longer satisfied with distance. They wanted transparency. They wanted humanity. They wanted something the monarchy had never been built to provide. And she knew the old model wouldn't survive the new world. Not in the same way. Not with the same rules. Not with the same expectations. So she began planning for a moment she would not live to witness. Imagine that for a second. Planning not for the present, but for the inevitable weakness of the future. It takes a rare kind of clarity to do that. It takes someone who understands that power is not protected by force, but by perception. So while the world thought she was decorating herself with jewelry, she was actually positioning symbols like chess pieces, preparing for a game no one else knew was coming. Because the Queen Mother didn't just collect jewels. She deployed them. Each one had history. Each one had purpose. Each one had timing. And timing was everything. She didn't believe in reacting to crisis. She believed in preventing it. Which is why she separated her private jewels from the rest of the royal collection. People assumed it was sentimental. It wasn't. It was strategic. She was removing the most powerful symbols from the reach of instability. Not because she feared who would hold them in the present, but because she feared who might hold them in the future. Now, here's where the story shifts into something almost prophetic. According to those closest to her, the Queen Mother spoke often about one thing. The monarchy will survive, but only if the right woman stands at the center. Not the loudest woman. Not the most dominant woman. Not the one with the highest title. The right woman. She believed history repeats itself until someone breaks the pattern. And she didn't want the monarchy to live through another cycle of collapse followed by recovery. She wanted continuity without disaster. But here's the part no one understood at the time. She wasn't talking about the woman standing beside the king in the present. She was talking about the woman who would stand beside the crown in the future. A woman who had not yet appeared. A woman who would earn her role without demanding it. A woman the world would come to trust not because of who she married, but because of who she was. Years later, that woman turned out to be Catherine, but the Queen Mother never met her. Which raises a chilling question. How do you prepare for someone you've never seen? How do you choose a successor without knowing their face? How do you secure the future using only instinct, memory, and unresolved history? The answer is unervingly simple. You don't choose the person. You choose the qualities. You build a plan that activates only when those qualities appear. You select symbols that cannot be misinterpreted, and you leave them in the hands of the one person who understands timing better than anyone else. Princess Alexandra was trusted with the win, but the Queen Mother herself defined the why, because she believed a crisis was coming, not of scandal, but of identity. A moment when the monarchy would no longer be protected by mystery, or glamour, or tradition, but by one thing only: credibility. And credibility lives in people, not crowns, not titles, not history, people, which meant the future would belong to the woman who could carry the institution without needing to defend it. But the Queen Mother also understood something far more dangerous.